The media continues to press the Biden administration for a coherent policy with regard to Ukraine's border conflict with Russia. Meanwhile, there's another border crisis that's going virtually unnoticed. America's southern border remains a total disaster, with the illegal border crossings in December of this year more than doubling those of a year before. So, which border do they care about more, America's or Ukraine's? Friends, it is time for Hold the Line, and we're going to figure this out. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Let's start with the border that matters to us. Before we talk about Ukraine, which, by the way, means in old Slavic language, borderland, let's actually talk about our own southern border first, before the territorial integrity of Ukraine becomes the entire focus of the rest of the media. In fiscal year, or rather in December, here's what we got for border encounters. 2022, 178,840. 2021, 73,000. 2020, 40,000. You can see a very clear pattern here, folks, right? Comparing month to month, years back, you can see that we are at a huge number of illegal border crossings going on. Remember, encounters include arrests, it includes gotaways, it includes surrenders at the border. All those numbers add up to substantial illegal immigration. In fact, really unprecedented in many ways, illegal immigration into the United States. What the heck is going on? Well, we know the Biden regime doesn't care about it very much. In fact, if anything, they want more of it. So it's not even right to say they don't care. They encourage it. Here's video of the federal government, believed to be Immigration and Customs Enforcement, releasing single adult migrants, almost all men, at a parking garage in Brownsville, Texas. This is from Fox Los Angeles. They're letting them out, and some of them were then put into taxis, where they were then taken to airports, where they were flying to other places all around the country. So every state under the Biden administration is essentially a border state. So let's just be very clear about this. We have a wide open southern border. We have violations of our sovereignty happening on a broad basis across the country, because people are then going to other places across the United States and they're in this country illegally. Biden regime doesn't care about that, though, right? What are they being asked about by our press yesterday? Total questions during the Biden press conference. We can show you what they were being asked. Southern border, you had one question, okay? Ukraine, you had 6 questions. So we can tell which border they are much more interested in spending time and attention on. That much is clear. So we want to make sure that we talk about the borders that matter to the United States and the people here. Sure, Ukraine, there might be a conflict there with Russia, could get very ugly. People are concerned about that. It's rightfully a news story, there's no question. But what about what's happening here in America as well? I mean, can we walk and chew gum at the same time? Can we actually have a focus on the homeland, our own homeland, and less of the hysteria around what we're going to do to stop Putin from invading Ukraine? The answer, by the way, is we're not going to do anything to stop it. It's up to Putin whether he's going to go in or not. But on the issue of our own border, going back to that, Jen Psaki was asked why so many young men are crossing the border, given the numbers that we're seeing released by CBP, given the video from Fox Los Angeles on people that were just being let go. Here's the White House press secretary saying, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Why is it that large numbers of single adult men are being released into the United States just hours after being apprehended at the southern border?
Well, I'm not sure the specifics of what you're referring to, Peter.
Not sure about the specifics. So hundreds of thousands of people are coming to the United States every month in violation of our laws. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing here. We don't know what the circumstances are of we don't know the full scale, really, of the cartels benefit from this financially, and also the enormous influx of illegal drugs, including fentanyl in this country. We had an all-time high of over 100,000 fentanyl and other drug overdoses last year. You would think most of that stuff's coming across the southern border. This would be an issue of urgent national concern, right? Not for this White House. In fact, as we know, there are people who are being released and told that they are supposed to appear in court later on, right? Ticket to appear, notice to appear. What's actually happening? Well, a lot of legal immigrants, tens of thousands of them already, have been released in just a matter of months, if you look back at the data, into this country, and who knows what's happening to them? Does the White House know? Here's Jen Psaki again when she's asked about it.
You mentioned that they're supposed to check in at a local ICE office, but we know that just between March and August, which is a very small sample size, DHS says more than 47,000 of these migrants that were given notices to report did not show up. So why let them into the U.S. unsupervised in the first place?
Well, again, we have a stringent protocols and processes that we implement here. That includes expelling individuals who come in under Title 42, given we are still in a global pandemic, and includes those who do not show up will be subject to the repercussions of that. So that is the policy we're implementing from our Homeland Security Department.
Okay.
Pure propaganda. I mean, she doesn't believe a word of what she's saying there. No one who knows anything about the border believes a word of what she's saying. It's just not true. It's just not true. Stringent protocols in place, sure. That's why the hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants a month are pouring into the country, because, you know, they're hearing so much about those who came before them and the stringent protocols for getting into this country. You know where we do have a lot of administration focus, though, when it comes to borders and security and the stringent protocols thereof? Ukraine. Here's Psaki on Russians on Ukraine's border and the needs of our regional allies. Watch this one.
We have spoken to the fact that, and we've put out a lot of information about our view of the preparations being made by President Putin and the Russians. While we can't get into the mind of President Putin, we are seeing the preparations that they're making at the border. We have been very clear, and the President has been direct, that military action by Russia could come at any time. He said that last week as well. So we have been in conversations and discussions with Eastern Flank countries. Obviously, our Secretary of State just returned from a trip to Europe as well, and he was part of the discussions this weekend too. And part of that has been contingency planning and discussing what their needs have been.
Yeah, I'm sure Putin is shaking in his boots over all the contingency planning that the Biden regime is doing. In case you're wondering, Kamala's out there telling everybody, Putin does anything bad, there'll be severe consequences. Watch this one from the vice president.
Hi, guys. I know you've been asking about Ukraine, so here's the deal. First of all, I am being briefed on a constant basis by my national security team. And as you know, the president, I, and other members of our administration have been in active discussions with our allies and partners around the globe, in particular in Europe. And the bottom line is that we have been clear and consistent for quite some time that we respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and we expect that Russia would do the same, and any aggressive action taken by Vladimir Putin will be met with severe consequences.
We'll see how that goes. From the border czar, by the way. Perhaps she's more successful at defending Ukraine's borders than U.S. southern border. We'll see. All right, while a lot are expecting America to entangle itself in yet another overseas conflict that it can ill afford, what are Ukraine's actual neighbors in Europe doing to help? We're going to talk to Heritage Foundation's Niall Gardner about this when we come back. First, I want to talk to you about protecting your online data. A lot of companies promise you privacy is guaranteed, but that's not true. That's why you need a new privacy and security app called Secure. It's spelled S-E-K-U-R. Secure is using proprietary encryption and it's offering secure instant messaging and email. With Secure, all of your communication is based on servers and data centers hosted in Switzerland without using any of the big tech platforms. Privacy is a big issue now. Without real security, people can read your emails, messages, even your bank information. Secure will never mine your data and never asks for your phone number. You can send emails to your doctor, banker, lawyer, anyone else with total confidence you're not being spied on by your internet provider or big tech. Secure is your solution to stop the constant theft of your digital identity. It costs only $5 for the messenger, only $10 for the messenger and email combination package. Go to secure.com and take back your privacy today. That's SEKUR.com. Use promo code BUCK for 25% off. We'll be right back with more. Hold the line. Fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine continue to grow. The U.S. and the U.K. have responded with threats of sanctions and withdrawing diplomatic staff from their embassies in Kiev. And for months, remaining Western territories have watched an extraordinary deployment of Russian reinforcements to the border with Ukraine. Analysts are questioning whether the West can actually deter Russia at all. So just how far are Western allies willing to go to defend the country? Here's the analysis is Niall Gardner, the director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. Niall, thanks for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Great to be here. Thank you, Buck.
So let's just look at this for where we are right now. What is the situation and how imminent does invasion seem? Can it still be averted?
Well, those are great questions. And, you know, the fact is that we simply cannot predict with any certainty what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But we do know that the Russians have approaching 135,000 troops massing on the border with Ukraine. The Ukrainians are preparing for an imminent invasion. The view in both London and Washington, I think, is that an invasion is increasingly likely. In fact, I was in London just a few days ago speaking to some very senior British officials there, and certainly the British government is preparing for the likelihood of a Russian invasion. The British think that quite possibly the Russians could be moving even for the capital city of Kyiv, which is a city of 4 million people. And so the stakes are incredibly high. And just today, the UK government announced that it was in talks with the United States about trying to shut Russia out of the international financial system altogether via the SWIFT system if the Russians do make a move. But of course, in Europe, some European countries oppose these kinds of measures. The Germans, for example, don't want to kick the Russians out of the international financial system. So you have a big divide that is taking place within the Western alliance at the moment. Putin is making most of those divisions. And you have countries on the one hand, like Great Britain, for example, who are standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. But on the other hand, you have, the Germans basically who are fundamentally opposed to even sending weapons to the Ukrainians to defend themselves. And so the Ukrainians are not asking for US or British troops to fight with them in the trenches against the Russians, but they are asking for the kind of defensive weapons that they need to protect their sovereignty, to protect their self-determination. But there are many countries in Europe who simply aren't willing to lift a finger to help the people of Ukraine, and that's very sad.
Here's the British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab saying that Putin will face very serious consequences. Here's what he said. I want to have you react to it.
What you're expecting to happen, an invasion?
I think there's a very significant risk of it. And we need to be clear, the world needs to keep its eye on this and be very clear with President Putin that it would not do this cost-free.
Would you send British troops to help defend Ukraine?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, Ukraine's not a NATO ally. We have been clear, but of course it's a friendly country, a partner of the UK and many other countries around the world.
Unlikely, but you're not ruling that out?
Well, I think it would be very unlikely, but of course you need to see.
But you're not ruling it out, are you?
No, I think it is extremely unlikely.
Okay. How unlikely is it that you think there might be, let's say there's an invasion, British troops, American troops, other NATO allies perhaps having soldiers in harm's way in Ukraine? What do you think that that's something that we really need to be concerned about, or is that too remote of a possibility?
Yeah, so there are some British forces on the ground in Ukraine right now in a training role. So they're training our Ukrainian allies, but those soldiers are not expected to play a combat role in the event of an invasion by Ukraine. So there's a difference between having training officers on the ground as opposed to combat troops who will be fighting there. And as the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab emphasised that in his view highly unlikely that you're going to see British forces fighting in Ukraine. Now, having said that, the UK is sending additional British troops to Eastern Europe, to the Baltic states, to defend the borders of the NATO alliance. Also, the United States is sending an additional 8,500 troops over to Eastern Europe. I would expect to see a significant additional NATO military troop buildup on the border of the NATO alliance, but you're not going to see those soldiers actually fighting on the ground in Ukraine, because Ukraine is not a NATO member. And so I think it is highly unlikely that you are going to see, for example, British or US forces or European forces in harm's way in Ukraine itself.
What would the Putin invasion seek to achieve? Do we have some idea of what the end state is? Is it the friendly government being installed to the Kremlin, the toppling of the government? Would that be enough? Or is it really trying to subsume Ukraine, or at least a portion of it, into the Russian Federation, similarly to what we saw with Crimea? Do we have any real sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Russians have various objectives here. But I think that their principal objective is to bring Ukraine into the Russian sphere of influence. And as the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss announced over the weekend, the British have intelligence that the Russians want to install a puppet government in the capital city of Kyiv. And I think ultimately, certainly Putin wants to exert control over Ukraine. Now, that can take many forms, but I suspect that if there is an invasion of the country, the Russians would like to certainly expand their area of control in the country. They would want to take hundreds of additional miles of territory and secure that territory. There's a possibility even that the Russians could make a move for the capital city itself. But I think that they would ultimately want to exert sort of political control over Ukraine, in addition to having control over extra land. The Russians currently control about 5% of Ukraine's territory in Crimea, but also de facto in eastern Ukraine as well, in the Donbass region. They would want to expand that physical area of control, have Russian boots on the ground over a significantly wider part of territory. But ultimately, they want to have a puppet in power in Kyiv itself, who will do the bidding of the Russian regime. So they have a variety of goals here, but I would not rule out the Russian military basically making a move for the capital city itself and even occupying the capital. So that is a possibility. They've got 135,000 troops. They are capable of doing that. Of course, they would have to fight a war of occupation against Ukraine. I do think the Ukrainian military is far stronger today than it was back in 2014 when the Russians invaded Crimea. And so the Ukraine is going to put up a fight. But the reality is that Russian military power is vastly superior to that of Ukraine. And the Russians will have complete control of Ukraine's airspace, and they can bomb targets at will, basically, if they decide to launch a full-scale invasion. So I have to say the outlook for Ukraine is very, very grim. And we will have to see exactly what the Russians intend to do here. But I would not rule out the possibility of a full-scale, wholesale invasion of Ukraine by Moscow.
Russian blitzkrieg on the horizon, possibly. Niall, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it. We'll be talking to you more.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much, Bud. Thank you.
President Biden's approval rating tanks to a new low as Americans, many of them at least, are at a breaking point with his handling of the coronavirus, among other issues. Coming up, Bethany Mandel joins us to discuss how the left's COVID hysteria is driving a wave of parents away from the Democratic Party. First, let's talk about the stock market. The market's very volatile right now, right? Look, one of the few people who predicted the 2020 crash is warning that something really big is coming in 2022. His name is Mark Chaikin, and his newest prediction has gone viral with 1.5 million views already. I know Mark. He's a 50-year veteran of Wall Street. He's a very smart guy. I'm encouraging you to pay attention to this message. According to Chaikin, a historic event in 2022 will cause a massive shift in the wealth divide, and it's going to affect anyone who owns stocks. He's predicting that a new form of technology is going to disrupt everything and change the way thousands of companies will need to do business in 2022. It'll affect everyone from Apple to Amazon, he says. Watch his full, brand new warning free of charge by going online to 2022stockmarketmessage.com. That website is 2022stockmarketmessage.com, all one word, 2022stockmarketmessage.com. We'll be right back with Bethany Mandel. We're just a few months shy of the 2-year mark since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic. And yet our country is still dealing with government restrictions, mask mandates, school closures, vaccines, boosters, all that stuff. And now, because of the way the Biden administration has handled the pandemic, new data is showing a remarkable shift in the way Americans identify themselves politically. Take a look at this Gallup poll. In the first quarter of 2021, 49% of the U.S. considered themselves to be Democrats. By the third quarter of 2021, self-identified Democrats dropped to 42%. For Republicans, it went the opposite way. As you can see in the graph, the more pronounced shift away from Democratic Party identification came in the third and fourth quarter of the year, which coincides with the fall as children return to school. So why might parents have snapped when it was time to send their kids back to school? Our next guest says it's because of, quote, the damage done to kids by the left's COVID hysteria. Loyal liberals who never dreamed of voting Republican are fleeing their own party. Contributing writer at Deseret News and editor of Heroes of Liberty, Bethany Mandel, joins us now to discuss. Bethany, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you write in your article that Biden's strategy is fascinating, telling Americans that everything is fine when they're keenly aware of the reality, especially parents of school children. And this strategy clearly doesn't seem to be working for the president. What's going on here?
No, I mean, so what the president is basically he's gaslighting everyone. He's saying everything is fine, the schools are open, and I put America back in business. And Americans can see that things are not okay, that their kids' schools, especially in blue areas, are not back to normal. They don't have extracurriculars, they're still wearing masks, they're still subject to draconian quarantine rules left and right. And he's doing the same thing with the supply chain stuff. Yesterday in a mommy Facebook group, I saw a woman asking how she can get a special formula for her baby because she can't find it literally anywhere. She can't order it from her insurance company. She can't get it on Amazon. She can't get it from the store. It's nowhere. And the president and Jen Psaki, his press secretary, keep on telling Americans that everything is fine. And we know that it's not.
So you also said that Biden wants to increase masking for kids, not reduce it. Where are we seeing this?
Yeah, we're seeing it. Los Angeles just passed a new rule inside and outside. Kids have to not only mask, but they can't wear cloth masks. They have to wear masks that have a wire over their nose. Across sort of blue America, we've now come to a realization that cloth masks don't work. Welcome to the headline that should have been a year ago. So instead of coming to that realization and realizing that we never had, oceans of dead children after they were wearing ineffective masks, and maybe we could take them out of the masks. The solution is no, let's mask harder and let's put them in KN95s. In New York, in LA, all of these blue areas, they've decided to mask children harder instead of just giving it up.
Here's Biden, by the way, last week, trying to, it feels like, take a victory lap for schools being open. Watch this.
And on Omicron and education, teachers are in revolt in so many places. Parents are at odds over closing schools and remote learning. You say we're not going to go back to closing schools. You said that just moments ago, yet they're closing in some areas.
First of all, I put in perspective the question you asked. Very few schools are closing. Over 95% are still open. The outfit, the individuals of the district that says we're not going to be open is always going to get, and I'm not being critical of any of you, it's always going to get front page. It's always going to be the top of the news. But let's put it in perspective. 95, as high as 98% of the schools in America are open, functioning, and capable of doing the job.
I would just say that any school where there's a mask mandate is not a normal school.
No, it's not just the masks, it's the quarantines, the facts that on any given day, a kid could get a call that a kid in their class had COVID and they can't go back to school for 10 days. But otherwise, it's mind-blowing to hear the president stand up there and poo-poo the fact that there are still schools that are closing. And this is a catastrophic situation. In Flint, Michigan, where 90% of the kids are a minority, 80% of whom are in poverty, they are doing distance learning. It's not learning. They're doing it indefinitely. Why isn't he standing up there and saying, open the schools, get the Black and brown kids in class and catch them up? Instead of saying that, he's like, most of the schools are open and everything is fine. No, it's not. It's not fine. By any metric, things are not fine.
There's a quote, and this is fascinating because you're starting to see, I think, people wake up to reality here who had been a little hesitant, maybe believed in Fauciism a little too much, or just the Democrat-aligned media with all the fire hoses of misinformation they have. It was too much for some people. But now I think there's an awakening going on. You got a quote from a mother of three that you interviewed. This is from your article. Mm-hmm. I hate when Democrats like Biden get all defensive and say that 95% of schools are open right now. They're being willfully ignorant and not paying attention that even though schools are open, they are not normal. Kids are masked, no field trips, no extracurriculars, no sports, not to mention the constant threat of closures when cases rise. Democrats should be paying attention instead of gaslighting me and telling me everything is fine. I couldn't agree more. This is crazy.
Yeah, and it's funny. So she's anonymous because, and I can tell you this as long as, it's not super, it doesn't get public as far as she's concerned, but her brother works for the Democratic Party. That's why she wanted to use a pseudonym. If she is this angry at the Democratic Party, she is a canary in the coal mine. And if they do not pay attention and heed that, they're in some real trouble.
Are you hearing this from more and more moms? I know this is part of the article,
yeah.
but what are they saying? I mean, it does feel like the Democrats are just perpetuating a delusion when they're acting like it's fine in schools. It's clearly not fine in schools, even when they're technically open.
No, it's clearly not fine. It's really painful to be a kid in school now. They are made to sit outside or have silent lunch where they're watching television and facing in one direction. It's worse than a prison in a lot of these schools. And what I'm hearing from a lot of these dyed-in-the-blue, very democratic moms who are super liberal on every single issue, they say, my kid is my number one priority. I will not stop until my kid has normalcy. They deserve it. They are entitled to it. They desperately need it. And anyone who stands between my kid and normalcy, I will bowl over. And if that means voting for Republicans like Glenn Youngkin, that's what I'm going to have to do, because I'm not doing another 2 years of this. My kids don't have 2 years left of their childhood that they can sort of waste away like this. I'm seeing people getting really, really radicalized, because when you put a problem in front of a mother, there's only one solution, and you will get bulldozed. And that's what Democrats are going to see. They're going to see themselves get absolutely bulldozed.
Just want to show you this before we go. Here's a photo of the governor of New York, who's a mask maniac, standing with other adults. They're unmasked, but the children are masked. The children are at less risk and less likely to spread COVID than any adults in the first place. In what world is this scientifically justified? I mean, how the hell can they get away with this crap?
It's honestly horrifying. I mean, I think there's some really larger societal questions that we need to have about what COVID exposed. And to me, as a parent, it tells me that this society and Democrats hate children. I mean, I think that we already kind of knew that. I mean, they're the party of tearing children limb from the womb. But it goes past that now. It goes to the fact that they don't want children in their restaurants. They don't want children in theaters. And they want children muzzled and quiet, and you cannot understand them as much as humanly possible. They do not care about the damage that any of this is doing. I don't see any prominent Democrats standing up and saying what we are doing is fundamentally wrong, and it has long-lasting implications, not just for individual children, but also for our society. Instead, they're just continuing to gaslight parents, and they are going to feel it in November.
Great article. Thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Remember when we were promised a return to civility if President Biden was, elected? Well, that went out the window yesterday, at least for a little bit, when the president called Fox News' Peter Doocy a, quote, dumb son of a bitch, end quote. We'll have more on that with the First TV's Morgan Zeggers coming up. First, I want to talk to you about protecting the most important asset you own, your home. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason. Without it, a fire, flood, or a burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime your homeowner's policy doesn't cover. It's called home title fraud. The FBI says home title fraud is one of the fastest growing crimes. It can ruin you financially, which is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans against your home and leaves you with the payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title. The instant they detect anyone, from a cyber thief to a renter to a relative, trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you're already a victim. Enter radio for 30 free days of protection. That's code radio at HometitleLock.com. Morgan Zeggers up next. Stay with us.
That's a great asset. More inflation. What a stupid son of a bitch.
Oh yeah, that's real presidential. Biden's vulgar insult was cut from the White House video feed, but was audible on video streamed by C-SPAN. Peter Doocy's very legitimate question came after a poll released Sunday found that 85% of Americans are worried about inflation, which hit a 40-year high of 7% in December. For more on this, let me bring in the founder of Young Americans Against Socialism and a contributor here at the First TV, Morgan Zeggers. Morgan, what's up?
Nothing much, Buck. Thanks for having me on.
I mean, we got to point this out, right? Because I thought only terrible Trump did these mean things to the journos and made them cry in the corner. Clearly, Biden, he's not a very nice guy. People always say that about him. He's got a temper and he says things all the time. But even beyond that, okay, so we pointed out, but also it's like the right, we don't really care. We're like, yeah, whatever, he's a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, I see a few different angles on here. First of all, anybody who thought that President Biden was some sweet older man that would bring unity, I hope they've realized by now that he's been in office for decades. He's known for corrupt ties, and he's known for bad behavior. I mean, look at his son and the connections between him and communist China. We're not dealing with some squishy teddy bear in office right now, and I can't stand the fact that he's been given that reputation by so many. So the president of unity, that's not really how it works. He's been bad for quite some time.
And here's a Trump or rather a Biden flashback tweet against Trump here. In May of 2020, he wrote, Trump deflects legitimate questions with attacks. He bullies members of the press instead of taking responsibility for his failures. His efforts to undermine public confidence in the integrity of reporting violate our core values and threaten our very system of government. Yeah, sounds like he's describing himself.
Exactly. I mean, back to the Rules for Radicals book, accuse your opponents of what you are doing. We see this also happens with cancel culture. An example was Carhartt. I specifically wear thousands of dollars of Carhartt because I own a woodwork shop. And so I have a lot of Carhartt materials. The moment I found out that Carhartt is going to require vaccinations of their employees after the Supreme Court said OSHA cannot mandate this on businesses with over 100 employees, I said, okay, then I'm done supporting Carhartt. A lot of liberals then looked at us and said, oh, so you're fans of cancel culture when you want to cancel companies? And I said, no, it's not the same, because you lefties want to remove people from their platforms, remove supporters of all businesses, and completely eliminate them from the ability to do business because you don't like them politically. I just simply won't support them with my own private dollars. There's a big difference. And so I think it's a very similar with the media. It's a big difference between the Biden administration refusing any legitimate questions with all of these serious issues versus President Trump calling out BS when he sees it because the mainstream media is peddling false narratives about him.
So let's just take a moment to look at all the pearl clutching back in the day we had from Democrats in the media over how mean Trump was to journos. Brian Stelter, of course, back in March of 2018, calling a journalist a son of a bitch. It was wrong when Trump was just a candidate. It's even worse now that he is POTUS. And then Chris Hayes, of course, September of 2017. Today, the president called American citizens who express their political views sons of bitches. Oh, it's very upsetting. Are they upset, you think, now at Joe Biden? I'm just wondering.
No, absolutely not. And it's because the private companies in the mainstream media are doing the dirty work of the government. It's something that's unprecedented. I mean, usually in communist and socialist regimes, you have a state arm of media that does the government's bidding and pushes out government propaganda. But for some weird, ungodly reason in America, we have private companies that are just willingly, not forced at all, willingly doing the government's dirty work. It's really unprecedented and fascinating to see go down. So of course not. They're not going to ever hold him accountable. And this is all just pure political play.
By the way, here's a flashback to January of 2021, when Biden vowed that if anyone ever was disrespectful, any federal employee, he'd fire him on the spot. Watch this one.
I'm not joking when I say this. If you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. On the spot. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody is entitled to be treated with decency and dignity.
What do you think about that?
Buck, I mean, whenever I see him with these harsh, strict stances and he comes out, he's clearly, first of all, reading things that his staff wrote for him, so he's never speaking from the heart. But it's just very cringeworthy. It makes you feel uncomfortable. Similar when he gets up close with those journalists in the campaign cycle, if you remember that, he had some weird interactions with them. Everything that he does, it certainly doesn't exude strength and confidence. It more so makes people feel uneasy, and specifically uneasy to know that he's representing the free world. I mean, gosh.
It's amazing. Caitlyn Jenner, by the way, switching gears here for a second with you, Morgan, tweeted out her opinion on the women's sports situation, how the NCAA should adjust their transgender policy for sports. Here's what she tweeted out there. I've said from the beginning, biological boys should not compete against biological girls. This woke world we're living in right now isn't working. I mean, because the trans swimmer at UPenn, this is getting a lot of, well, actually not that much attention. We're talking about it. ESPN doesn't want to talk about it, but it seems like Caitlyn Jenner here is just saying what should be obvious to everybody.
Yeah, I respect her for saying that quite a lot, and I appreciate it. I mean, if anybody is going to really lead the movement on this, it should be somebody like Caitlyn Jenner, because they can personally attest to this. I mean, an Olympic athlete that is now transgender and able to testify to the fact that her body is biologically different than a female that is biologically a woman, when, especially when competing in a physical competition. I think that's key for people to have common sense. I mean, I guess people want to change their gender sometimes and be like Caitlyn Jenner and go from man to woman. But if you can't address the fact that your DNA, your bones, your chemical makeup is biologically just fundamentally different from a woman, then how can we operate with basic truths in any other policy sector? That's what I'm worried about, is we are abandoning basic fact and truth in a very crucial way. We're erasing womanhood, but we're also just setting a precedent that it's okay to abandon basic facts when negotiating a political stance. And that's why I'm worried. I mean, take that same mentality into other issues like climate change, other issues like healthcare and COVID, and you start to understand that if we don't operate in reality, we're going to continue to have these terrible policies set for us and pushed onto us by the executive branch's bureaucracy and the Fauciites that are out there.
Morgan, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Buck.
More mask madness, this time in an elevator. Coming up in Quick Hits, we'll show you the latest lunacy from the mask police. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is calling out the White House for halting the use of monoclonal antibody treatments. And tragically, New York City is now mourning the loss of the second NYPD officer who was shot in Harlem on Friday. We're going to honor his service and sacrifice coming up here in a moment on Quick Hits. But first, this one went completely viral. This was just totally insane. And let's just set the scene here, because I've dealt with this myself. So this one hits close to home. There are people out there who are lunatics about masks. They will go into a crowded bar or restaurant, no mask, hours on end. But then you go into an elevator with them for 30 seconds or less, and if you're not wearing a mask, they act like you're a mass murderer, and they don't seem to understand why that doesn't make sense. This is what Fauciism and the Democrat apparatus has done to people. They've turned them completely insane. It's embarrassing, but this is the reality. But in this one, you have to add something into it. You have two women, referred to all across the internet as masked Karens, who physically assault a black man in an elevator. And then I want you to listen to, after they've assaulted this black man for not wearing a mask, what these clearly Biden voters decide to do to cover themselves after the assault. Watch.
Get out.
Get out.
Yo, stop.
Get out. Get out.
What you guys doing?
Get out.
Get out. What you guys doing? What's wrong with you?
Get out.
Don't you have kids? Get out. I'm not touching you. Oh, did you just hit me? Did you just hit me?
You just hit me.
You just hit me? You too?
Black Lives Matter.
Yo, this is racist. Wow.
Get out. Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Stop. Yo, stop recording me. I don't know you. Yo, you need to stop.
Get out.
No, I'm not getting out. I was
Yes,
here
you
first.
are.
They start shouting Black Lives Matter to the black man they have just assaulted. Someone explain that one? Oh, almost like they think it's like a religious creed and they'll be defended. They won't get canceled if they shout Black Lives Matter after attacking a black man because he's not wearing a mask in an elevator, because masks work so well, as we know. You're an idiot. Oh boy. By the way, speaking of masks, there's a mom who this went viral too online. She tweeted a picture of her son in a mask with the caption, "Isolating with a 3-year-old is brutal but doable. Masking up a 3-year-old kid indoors. This is your own family member. Why are you masking up a kid indoors?" You know, if Fauci was not a disgusting coward, he would see stuff like this and say, hey guys, that's not, you don't need to mask up within members of a family. It's not worth it. Just some basic stuff. Just the most straightforward things. I wish Fauci would win some, but he won't, because it'll upset the neurotics watching CNN and MSNBC, among other channels that the left caters to, or that caters to the left, both. And this is the situation. He's a coward, and people are doing crazy things because of the lunacy that he has perpetrated on this country in the service of his own ego in a lot of cases. Governor Ron DeSantis is the best governor in America, although Glenn Youngkin's doing a good job early on, I got to say. But Ron DeSantis' record is incredible so far as the governor of Florida. He has created a beacon of freedom in a sea of madness during the COVID pandemic. But this one is just inexplicable. This is a DeSantis tweet from today. Without a shred of clinical data to support its decision, the Biden administration has revoked the emergency use authorization for life-saving monoclonal antibody treatments. Without a shred of clinical data. Why would they do this? Monoclonal antibodies have saved lots of lives, very effective. They're pulling them? Why would they do that? Anybody want to try to answer that one? Almost like you get the sense, are they trying to punish, is the federal government trying to punish Florida for taking a more all of the above approach, a better approach than many of the blue states, which, as we know, were not prepared when it came to testing, were not prepared when it came to capacity, were not prepared when it came to the COVID season that they went through, despite their super high vaccination rates, as if that was going to save them and stop all of this. They were wrong, as you know, but they don't care that they're wrong. They care that they're in power and that they can make other people do things that cater to their neuroses. And that is one thing that Florida has been thankfully able to hold the line against, you could even say. And this was a sad one that I just wanted to pay respects for a moment here to the second NYPD officer who died after a shooting in Harlem on Friday. Here's a picture of 27-year-old Wilbert Mora, and died serving his city, serving his community and his country. He was one of two officers shot. He also has passed away. The officers that we have, they hold the line against the criminals out there, and they make us all safer, and we appreciate what they do for us. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.